The morning she stood at that podium and told a room full of people that love at first sight was a neurological illusion, a trick of dopamine and pattern recognition and unprocessed longing. I was standing in the back of the auditorium with my coat still on and my hands in my pockets, watching her lie through the most confident smile I had ever seen. She didn't see me at first. The room was large, maybe 300 seats, packed with a mix of psychology students and the kind of people who came to evening lectures to feel smarter than they actually were. Wren Hadley commanded that stage the way she commanded every room I had ever watched her enter, with a quiet certainty that looked effortless from the outside but I knew, by then, had cost her everything. The idea that you can love someone the moment you see them, she was saying, her voice clear and unhurried, is one of the most romanticized and most damaging myths we continue to pass down to each other. What we call love at first sight is attraction amplified by a story we tell ourselves in retrospect. The audience nodded. People wrote things down. I didn't write anything down. I just watched her, and then she looked up, scanning the back row the way speakers do when they're searching for a friendly face, and she found mine instead. She stopped talking, not dramatically, not for long. Just half a breath's worth of silence, the kind most people in the room probably didn't even notice. But I noticed. I had been noticing the small pauses in Wren Hadley for 8 months by then. I knew the difference between the ones that meant she was choosing her next word carefully and the ones that meant something had surprised her. This one was the second kind. She recovered instantly, the way she always did, and kept talking. Smart, precise, completely in control. I turned up the collar of my coat and settled in to wait, because I knew something the 300 people in that auditorium didn't know. I knew that the reason she could talk about love at first sight with such certainty wasn't because she had never experienced it. It was because she had. 8 months ago, in a bookstore on Clement Street, over a copy of a book about the history of cartography, a woman who had spent 2 years writing about why love at first sight was impossible had felt it happen to her. And the man it happened with was standing in the back of her lecture hall, still wearing his coat, still waiting. But I should take you back to where it actually started, because the beginning is the part that still doesn't make sense to me, even now, and I've had 8 months to try. I'm not the kind of man who walks into rooms and turns heads. My name is Owen Calloway. I'm 32. I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm in San Francisco that mostly does commercial retrofits, making old buildings safe enough to last another 50 years. It's the kind of work that requires a lot of patience, a lot of attention to invisible things, and very little glamour. I like it. I like knowing that the work I do keeps something standing that might otherwise fall. Outside of work, my life is quiet in a way that took me a long time to stop apologizing for. I have a good apartment, a reliable truck, a sister named June who calls me every Sunday whether I answer or not, and a modest shelf of books that I actually read instead of displaying. I don't go to evening lectures. I don't spend my weekends at galleries or wine bars with groups of people I'm still deciding whether I like. I go to bookstores on Saturday mornings. I go alone. I walk slowly, and I don't have a list. The Saturday in question, I had a list. June had asked me to pick up a specific title she had been wanting, a book about the history of cartography, old maps, the way humans used to imagine the shape of the world before they knew it. She had given me the author's name and the title written on a torn envelope. I had already been to 2 other bookstores that morning with no luck. The third was a small independent place on Clement Street with a green awning and a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Organized in a way that makes sense to us." I pushed through the door and stood for a moment while my eyes adjusted to the lower light. The smell of old paper and coffee came from somewhere in the back. A cat was asleep on the windowsill. 2 people were browsing in complete silence. I found the section I wanted, travel and exploration, and started working my way along the shelf. The book June wanted wasn't where it should have been. I moved to the adjacent section, history, and crouched down to check the lower shelves. I saw the spine at the same moment I heard someone else stop moving nearby. I reached for it. So did she. Our fingers touched the edge of the book at exactly the same second. And I looked up, and she was already looking at me. I'm not going to pretend I can fully explain what happened in that moment. I've tried. I've turned it over in my mind more times than I can count, the way you press a bruise just to confirm it's still there. All I can tell you is that I looked at this woman, brown hair tucked behind one ear, a gray sweater with a small ink stain near the cuff, eyes that were watching me with an expression I couldn't name, and something inside me went completely still. Not the still of shock, the still of recognition, like a building that has been slightly off-center for years and suddenly, without warning, settles into the right alignment. I don't know how long we stayed like that. 2 seconds, probably. It felt like longer. Then she pulled her hand back. "Sorry," she said. Her voice was composed. Professional, almost. Like she had already put on armor in the time it took her to withdraw her fingers. "I didn't see you there." "It's fine," I said. I held out the book toward her. "Were you looking for this?" She hesitated. "I was, actually. But it's the last copy. I was getting it for my sister. I was getting it for research." We both looked at the book. I looked at her. Something about the word research sat strangely with me. Who does research in a bookstore on a Saturday morning? "You could take it," I said. "I can order another copy online." She shook her head. "No, your sister should have it." She paused. "You drove to a physical bookstore on a Saturday morning for your sister's book?" "Third store I've tried today." Something shifted in her expression. Just slightly. "That's kind," she said, in a voice that suggested she was filing the information away somewhere careful. "I don't know what made me do what I did next. I'm an engineer. I think in terms of solutions and sequences. I don't make impulsive decisions. But standing there in the quiet of that bookstore with this woman I had never met, holding a book about old maps, I heard myself say, 'They might have another copy in the back. Want to ask?'" She looked at me for a moment. "I can ask myself." "I know." I didn't move. She looked at me for another moment. Then, "Okay." The bookseller checked. There was one more copy, slightly battered at the corners, shelved incorrectly in the maritime section. He brought it out looking pleased with himself. She took the original. I took the battered one. We paid separately and walked toward the door together without deciding to. On the sidewalk, she stopped. The morning was cool and gray, the kind of San Francisco morning that smells like salt and coffee and other people's plans. "Wren," she said suddenly. I looked at her. "What?" "My name. Wren Hadley. Owen Calloway." I almost held out my hand, then didn't, then did. She shook it. Her grip was firm and brief, and she let go first. "Enjoy the book," she said. "You too." She walked away toward a car parked half a block down. I watched her for a moment, which I'm aware is not a thing I typically do. Then I got into my truck and sat there for a long while before I turned the key. I gave June her book that afternoon. She unwrapped it and immediately said, without looking up, "This one's a little beat up." Long story. She finally looked up. "Owen, what's wrong with your face?" "Nothing. You look like someone told you the load-bearing wall was in the wrong place." I didn't know how to explain what had happened in a bookstore in a way that didn't sound ridiculous, so I said nothing. June studied me for another few seconds with the particular focus of someone who has known you your entire life, then went back to examining the book. She opened the cover. On the inside, someone had written a quote in pencil, one I couldn't read from where I was sitting. "Oh," June said softly, "this is a good one." I went home and looked up the name Wren Hadley. I found her immediately. She wasn't hard to find. She had a professional website, a small but well-read newsletter, and an essay that had been shared several thousand times on the internet. The essay was titled, "The Myth of Love at First Sight, a behavioral psychologist's case for slow love." I sat at my kitchen table and read it straight through. It was smart, precise, occasionally cutting. It dismantled the idea that instant attraction could be genuine love by pulling apart the neuroscience, the cognitive biases, the retrospective storytelling humans do to turn a feeling into a narrative. She didn't mock people who believed in it. She was more careful than that. She argued, very gently and very thoroughly, that the feeling was real but the interpretation was wrong, that what felt like love at first sight was longing meeting a projection, not a person. I read it twice. Then I sat with it for a long time. Here is the thing I noticed, and I want to be precise about this because it matters. The essay was not cold. It was not the work of someone who had never wanted to believe in something larger. It was the work of someone who had believed in it once, maybe more than once, and had been badly hurt by the believing. I recognize that kind of writing. The kind where the argument is too careful, too thorough, too well constructed to be purely academic. The kind where someone has done the intellectual work in order to survive the emotional experience. I didn't know yet what had happened to her, but I knew something had. I went back to the bookstore the following Saturday. I told myself I wasn't going there to see if she would be there. I told myself I was going because I had liked it and wanted to come back, which was also true. I spent 20 minutes browsing, found a book on bridge engineering that I didn't need but bought anyway, and was almost at the door when I heard her voice. She was in the back corner, talking to the bookseller about whether a particular novel was worth the price of the hardcover edition. I stopped, pretended to look at something on a nearby shelf. Listened to the way she argued. Measured, engaged, genuinely interested. She noticed me when she turned to leave. We both went still for a second. "You're here," she said. "Bookstore," I said, as if that explained anything. "You come on Saturdays?" Starting to seem that way. She had a tote bag on her shoulder and reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and she looked, in that moment, like someone who had not expected to see me and was not yet sure how to feel about it. "Coffee?" I asked. She opened her mouth to say no. I could see it forming. Then she said, "Actually, yes." We went to the place 2 doors down. She took her coffee black, no sugar, which I noted and filed away without quite knowing why. We sat at a small table by the window and she asked me what I did, and I told her, and she asked real questions, not polite questions, real ones, the kind that meant she was actually listening. I told her about structural retrofitting, about the way old buildings had been designed with the knowledge available at the time, and how the work now was to understand what the original builders had been trying to do and preserve that intention while making it safe for the future. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. "You're trying to understand what they meant," she said, "not just what they built." "Yeah." I looked at her. "Exactly that." She looked away first. I told her I had read her essay. She went very still. "Which one?" "The love at first sight one." She picked up her coffee and held it without drinking. "And, I think you wrote it about someone who hurt you." The silence that followed was long enough to be uncomfortable. She put the coffee down slowly. When she looked at me, her expression was controlled but not quite closed. "I wrote it based on research and documented cognitive science," she said carefully. "I know. It's a good essay. The research is solid." I paused. "That's not the same as what I said." She looked at me for a long moment. "You've known me for 2 Saturdays, 1.5, and you think you can—" "I'm not trying to read you," I said quietly. "I just read the essay, and I recognized something in it. That's all." She didn't answer. She didn't argue either. She just picked up her coffee again and looked out the window and said, after a while, "The cartography book was good. June hasn't stopped talking about it. Good sister, the best kind of difficult." She smiled then, small and sideways, like she was trying not to, and I thought, there it is. That's the one that's real. We stayed for almost 2 hours. She left first. Said she had a deadline. At the door she stopped without fully turning around. "Same time next week, I'll be here," I said. She nodded once and walked out into the gray morning. For the next 6 weeks we met on Saturday mornings. Always at the bookstore first, always coffee after. She told me about her work, behavioral psychology, the gap between what people believed about their own emotions and what the research actually showed. She was working on a book, an extension of the essay, a full argument for what she called slow love. Love built deliberately, consciously, without the distortion of instant feeling. I listened carefully because I am good at listening, and because I wanted to understand her, not to win an argument, but because understanding felt like the only honest way in. I did not tell her what I had felt in the bookstore that first day. I wasn't sure I had the right to. Not yet. She was funny in a way that surprised me. Dry and quick and occasionally absurd, she made a joke one morning about the epistemology of grocery shopping that made me laugh loud enough that the table next to us looked over. She looked pleased and embarrassed in equal measure. She remembered small things I said, the name of the bridge I was working on, that June's birthday was in November, that I didn't drink tea because it tasted like apologies. She was careful with touch, never initiated it. When I handed her something, a menu, a book, she made sure our fingers didn't meet. I noticed all of it. Then one Saturday she didn't come. No message, no explanation. I waited 40 minutes, bought a book I didn't need, and went home. The apartment felt quieter than usual, which it shouldn't have. She had never been there. But something about her absence filled a space I hadn't realized she'd been occupying. The following Saturday she was back. She looked tired, and there was something careful in her expression, like she had rehearsed coming here and wasn't sure she had gotten it right. "I was in New York," she said before I could ask. "Work thing." I should have said, "You don't have to tell me your schedule." She looked at me. "I know. I wanted to." I bought the coffee. She didn't argue about it, which was new. We sat and for a while talked about nothing in particular. A book she had read on the plane, an exhibit she had gone to see in a gallery near her hotel. And then, in the middle of a sentence about something entirely unrelated, she stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "That day in the bookstore." She was looking at her cup. "The first time, when we both reached for the book, I waited. Did you feel something?" She asked it quickly, like she had been holding it and needed to put it down. "Something you couldn't immediately explain." The question sat between us on the small table like something fragile and very important. "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. She didn't look up. "What did you do with that?" she asked. "I sat in my truck for a while," I said honestly, "and then I went home and looked you up." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "I looked you up too." "I know. You told me you recognized the firm name when I mentioned it the second Saturday. I was hoping you hadn't noticed that." I noticed. She finally looked up. Her expression was complicated in a way I had learned to recognize. The look she got when she was fighting two things at the same time, and neither of them was clearly winning. "Owen," she said, "I need you to understand something." "Okay." "I don't think that what we felt in that bookstore was love. I think it was, Wren." She stopped. "I'm not asking you to call it anything," I said. "I haven't asked you to call it anything. I've just been showing up on Saturday mornings and buying bad coffee and listening to you talk about the epistemology of grocery shopping." She blinked. "I'm not trying to prove your essay wrong," I said. "I don't care about the essay. I care about the person who wrote it." I paused. "And I think the person who wrote it has been using it to make sure no one gets close enough to hurt her again." The silence was different this time. Not defensive, something more exposed than that. She looked out the window. A long time passed. "His name was Daniel," she said finally. Her voice was even, the way voices get when someone has practiced keeping them that way. "We were together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. 3 weeks before the wedding, he didn't come home. No call, no text, no explanation. He just stopped." She paused. "I found out 2 weeks later through a mutual friend that he had moved to Portland with someone he had met at a conference." She stopped again. "He never contacted me, not once, not an apology, nothing." I didn't speak. I just waited. "I had believed in us completely," she said. "I had believed in the feeling I had when I met him. I had trusted that feeling like evidence. And it wasn't evidence of anything except my own capacity to be wrong." She finally looked at me. "So I did what I knew how to do. I researched it. I wrote about it. I turned it into something I could understand." "And then you could control it," I said. "Yes. And then I walked into a bookstore." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "And then you walked into a bookstore." We sat for a long moment in the quiet of the coffee shop, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the low murmur of other people's conversations filling the space between us. "I'm not Daniel," I said. "I know. I'm not asking you to feel something specific, or call it something specific, or believe in anything you don't believe in." I looked at her steadily. "I'm asking you to let me be here, on Saturday mornings, and see what happens at whatever speed makes sense to you." She was quiet for a very long time. "What if I never get there?" she said finally, voice smaller than I had heard it before. What if I've spent so long building the argument against it that I can't let it down? Then we figure that out together, I said. But you don't have to decide that today. She looked at me. Those careful eyes that noticed everything and let nothing in easily, doing the thing they sometimes did when she thought I wasn't paying attention, going a little wide, a little uncertain, a little real. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Lightly. Just for a second. Then she pulled it back. "Same time next Saturday?" she said. "I'll be here," I said. And I was. And she was. And the weeks that followed were not a dramatic unfolding of some grand love story. They were quieter than that, and more important than that, and harder won than any grand story has room for. She texted me a photograph of a map she found in an antique shop because she thought I would like it, and I did. I brought her a book I found by accident that I thought she'd find useful for her research, and she stayed up until 2 in the morning reading it and texted me at 2:15 to say she had underlined 47 things and was furious with me for giving it to her at 11 p.m. I met June, who shook Wren's hand and then looked at me over her shoulder with an expression that said everything without a single word. Wren laughed with her whole body exactly twice in that first month. The first time was when June told the story of how I had driven to 3 bookstores on a Saturday morning just to get a single book. The second time was when I tried to explain the anxiety of watching a century-old load-bearing beam moved by a crane and ended up acting out the structural physics with a salt shaker and 2 sugar packets. Both times she laughed, I felt the same thing I had felt in the bookstore. That stillness. That settling into alignment. One evening in November, she called instead of texting. It was late, maybe 10:30, and her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before. Not upset exactly, just unguarded. "I've been staring at this chapter for 4 hours, she said. The chapter about slow love, about building love as a practice. And? And I can't write it. I waited. "I know the argument," she said. "I've been making it for 2 years. I know every piece of it." A pause. "But I keep thinking about how it felt in the bookstore, and I can't put the 2 things in the same place without them contradicting each other." I let the quiet sit for a moment. "What if they're not supposed to be in the same place?" I said. "What do you mean? What if the feeling at the beginning isn't the love? What if it's just the door? The place where you first notice there might be somewhere worth going?" I paused, trying to find the right shape for what I was thinking. You can have a feeling in the first second and still choose to walk through the door slowly. Still take the time. Still build it carefully. The feeling doesn't have to be the proof, it can just be the start. The line was quiet for a long time. "Owen, yeah, that's going in the chapter." I smiled in my empty kitchen. Glad to help. "Don't get smug about it. I'll try to contain myself." She hung up laughing. I held my phone for a long while after the call ended. 3 weeks after that, she pulled back. I don't know exactly what triggered it. I suspect it was the chapter. I suspect that writing about slow love while being in the middle of something that had started with an instant feeling created a tension she didn't know how to resolve without admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She answered texts more briefly. She canceled one Saturday, a deadline, she said, and suggested the following Saturday instead, but then was quiet and distracted through most of it. She didn't reach across any tables. She laughed less. When I said her name, there was a half-second delay before she answered, like she was deciding whether to let me in or keep the door where it was. I gave her space because I thought she needed it, and giving people room to find their own way back seems to me like one of the most important things you can do for someone you care about. But 2 weeks of space started to feel like a wall going up, and I knew the difference. June called on a Sunday, the way she always did. I told her more than I intended to. She listened without interrupting, which is not her natural state, so I knew she was taking it seriously. "Owen," she said when I finished. "Yeah, go to her, not to convince her of anything. Not to make a case, just so she knows you're still there." I thought about that for a day. Then I went to find something I had almost forgotten about. On the day I had met Wren in the bookstore, I had done something I hadn't fully understood at the time. After she had taken the good copy of the cartography book and I had taken the battered one, on my way to the register, I had gone back and picked up a second clean copy. I had held it for a minute at the counter, not entirely sure why I was buying it. The bookseller had raised an eyebrow. I had said something about gifts. The book had been sitting on my shelf for 8 months, spine uncracked, waiting. I drove to her apartment on a Thursday evening. She opened the door in an oversized sweater with a pen tucked behind her ear and the look of someone who had been deep in work and had been interrupted. She stared at me. I held up the book. "I bought 2 copies the day we met," I said. "I bought a battered one for myself and a good one for June, and then I went back and bought a second good one, and I don't really know why. I just did. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't thinking clearly about anything that morning." I paused. "I think I knew, somehow, that I wanted you to have it, even though I'd only known you for about 11 minutes. She stared at the book. Then at me. Her voice when it came out was not steady. "Owen, I'm not here to make an argument," I said. "I'm not here to tell you what to feel or what to call anything. I'm just here because I'm still here, and I wanted you to know that." She took the book from my hands, looked at the cover for a long time, running her thumb along the spine the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. Then she looked up at me. "He left without saying anything," she said quietly. 3 weeks before the wedding. And the worst part wasn't the heartbreak. The worst part was that I had trusted the feeling I had when I met him. I had believed in something I couldn't prove, and then I had to find a way to live with having been that wrong. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. So I spent 2 years making sure I had a reason to never trust a feeling that fast again. I built the whole argument to make sure. "I know," I said, "but you're not him." "No." "And the feeling I had in that bookstore wasn't the same feeling," she said. "It was different. Quieter. Less like being pulled toward something and more like—" She stopped. "More like what?" She took a breath. "More like finding something I didn't know I had lost." I didn't speak, I just waited. "I've been scared," she said. "Not of you, of being wrong again. Of trusting something that started in an instant and letting it mean something and then having it disappear." She looked at me steadily. "You've been so patient with me. I told you I would be." "You did." She was quiet for a moment. "I think I'm ready to stop being scared. I can't promise I won't still overthink everything. I can't promise I'll be easy about any of this. I'm a structural engineer," I said. "I spend my professional life figuring out how to make complicated things hold." She laughed. And it was the full one, the real one that went all the way up and stayed. She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in," she said. "I'll make coffee." I stepped inside, and now I want to bring you back to that auditorium. Because we're almost back to where we started, and I want you to understand what I understood, standing in the back of that room with my coat still on and the weight of 8 months behind me. It was a Thursday evening in March. Wren was giving a talk to an audience of psychology students and general attendees about her book, which had come out 6 weeks earlier. The book she had been struggling to write when she called me at 10:30 on that November night. The book that had, in its 3rd chapter, an argument about how a feeling in the first moment of meeting someone could be the beginning of something real. Not the proof of it, not the love itself, but the door. The place where you first notice there might be somewhere worth going. I was standing in the back because she hadn't known I was coming. I had cleared my Thursday afternoon and driven across the city and slipped in after the talk had started, because I wanted to see her in this room, doing this thing, being this version of herself that I had watched her work so hard to become. She was brilliant. I say this without any particular bias, or maybe with every bias in the world. I honestly can't tell anymore, and I've stopped trying. She was careful and funny and precise, and she held that room with the ease of someone who had finally stopped fighting the very thing she was saying. And then she looked up and found my face in the back row. That half-breath of silence. The audience waited. She looked at me for one more second, and then she did something I did not expect. She smiled, not the professional one, the real one, the sideways one she tried not to make, the one I had been collecting like evidence for 8 months. She turned back to her notes, and then she set them down. "I want to say something that isn't in what I prepared," she said. The room shifted slightly, the particular attention of an audience that senses something unscripted. I've spent 2 years arguing that what we call love at first sight is a story we tell ourselves about a feeling we don't fully understand. And I still believe that, mostly." She paused. "But I've learned something in the past 8 months that I think belongs in this room. The feeling at the beginning isn't the love, it's the door. And what matters, the only thing that really matters, is whether you're brave enough to walk through it slowly, whether you can sit with someone in Saturday morning coffee shops and let them see the real argument behind the essay, whether you can be patient with someone who is scared, whether you can show up at a door with a book and just say, 'I'm still here.'" The room was very quiet. "I was wrong," she said. "Not the research, the meaning. And I think being willing to be wrong about the meaning is the bravest thing I have done in a very long time." She glanced toward the back of the room again. I didn't move. I just looked at her. The applause when it came was genuine and warm, and she stood at the podium receiving it with a composure that I knew, from 8 months of Saturday mornings, was only the surface of something much less composed underneath. Afterward, she found me near the door. The crowd was still thinning out around us, voices low, people pulling on coats. She had a coffee cup from somewhere, and there was a smudge of pen on her wrist, the one that was always there when she had been writing all day. "You came," she said. "I told you I would be there." She shook her head slightly. "I didn't know what that meant until tonight, that you meant it every time." I looked at her. Every time. She reached over and took my hand. Not briefly, the way she had that first time at the coffee table. She held on. "I'm going to get this wrong sometimes," she said. "I'm going to overthink things and pull back and write essays in my head about why I should be more careful. I know, and you're going to have to be patient with me. I've had 8 months of practice. This is not a smooth declaration of love," she said. "In case you were expecting one, I wasn't." "Good." She squeezed my hand once, the way someone does when they have decided something and are done deciding. "Because I love you." Impractically, and not at first sight, and with a great deal of overthinking. And also, she paused, with something that started the moment our hands touched a book in a bookstore on a Saturday morning. And I have no adequate scientific framework for that, and I've decided I'm at peace with not having one. I held her hand in both of mine. "I love you too," I said. "I think I have since about 11 minutes into knowing you. But I wasn't in a hurry." She made a small sound, half laugh, half something else that I didn't have a name for and didn't need one. Outside the auditorium, the evening air was cool and smelled like the city after rain. We walked to my truck without deciding to. She had her tote bag on one shoulder and the coffee cup in her free hand, and she was still holding mine with the other, and she was talking about something. The third question in the Q&A, which had annoyed her slightly. And I listened and watched the city go by and thought about load-bearing walls and old buildings and the way the best work is always about understanding what someone was trying to do before they knew how to do it safely. She said my name and I looked at her. "What are you thinking about?" "Buildings," I said, "and doors." She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "Me too. Some people spend their whole lives looking for the exact right feeling, the undeniable moment, the proof that love is real and safe and won't cost them anything. I understand that impulse. I felt it. I've watched someone I loved build a wall out of it, and then, slowly and imperfectly, choose to take it down. But here is what 8 months of Saturday mornings taught me. The feeling at the beginning isn't the love, it's the invitation. What you do with it, the patience, the honesty, the willingness to show up even when you're not sure you'll be let in, that is the love. The slow, deliberate, impractical kind that doesn't make for a clean essay but makes for a real life. Wren Hadley didn't believe in love at first sight. She believed in something harder and more honest, and more worth building. And the morning 2 hands reached for the same book in a quiet bookstore on Clement Street, she had already started, even if she didn't know it yet. Even if she had spent 2 years writing arguments against the very thing she was standing inside of. Even if it would take 8 months of Saturday mornings and 1 Thursday evening in a lecture hall for her to finally say the word out loud. She said she didn't believe in love at first sight, and she was right. What she found instead was better.